It's 6:01. The mayor is on his way, and I'm sure that Councilor Smith will be here soon, but we have a quorum. And Councilor Payne, Councilor Oshrin, and myself are here. I guess that counts as a roll call vote. And we'll turn it over to our team over here for a discussion on the budget, on revenues and expenses.
Sure. So good evening, councilors and members of the public. Just opening statement from me is just to simply remind everyone the purpose of tonight's meeting is to begin to unpack the budget as I presented it to council on Tuesday night. It's a chance for you all to ask questions after, of course, a presentation by Ms. Hamill, who loves to make those presentations to you. But it's a chance for you to ask your questions about things that you're interested in hearing more about. We'll break down as much of that as we possibly can, take any questions that we need to take with us and get those answers back to you. There's a series of work sessions, so the goal would be to focus on various key aspects of the budget over the course of those next 4 meetings. And then we have a wrap-up session if we should need it for any significant matters that may not have been able to be resolved over the course of the series of work sessions or that came up as a part of those work sessions. But my goal is just to make sure that you have what you need in order for you to consider adoption of the budget on the 9th of April, no later than April 15th if you should make a change on your calendar. So, Ms. Hamill.
Thank you. So just a few things. We're going to try to keep the presentation fairly short to give you all time for discussion and questions and those kind of things. So we're going to talk about the revenue changes from 24 to 25, the expenditure changes for 24 to 25, and then Mr. Cullinan is joining us to give you an update on the ARP, status of the ARP spending, and also to revisit the year-end surplus. So this is a slide you've seen before. This is just an illustration of the general fund annual change from year over year going back to 2010. The average of all of those years is just under $7 million. You'll see from the chart that over the last few years, the annual increase has been larger than normal. Of course, for 25, we know we do have some tax increases in here. In 23, we had a tax increase as well, which contributed to some of that. But largely, most of these annual increases have been from the real estate assessments and then also strong performing revenues for the economically sensitive ones, such as meals, lodging, sales. But this is also to illustrate the idea that while typically the budget does grow every year, there are always chances that it's not at the same level and that it could also reduce as well. So this was a chart that we showed you Tuesday night. Again, we talk about the pie and all the pieces of the pie. This is a breakdown of the categories of the revenues. The largest part of that is local taxes, which funds just under 71% of the budget. And from here, we're going to jump into some more of the...
What are designated revenues?
Designated revenues, we'll get to that slide in just a minute, but it's basically revenues like the school contracted services, the money that comes back from Charlottesville City Schools for those services, the money from revenue sharing that we allocate to capital projects, and then also our policy that the equivalent of 1% of the meals tax go to debt service. So the taxes make up about $16 million of the $23 million increase that has been proposed for 25. Real estate is $9 million of that. The numbers here do reflect the 2-cent rate increase. In addition to the meals tax, that would bring in another $4 million in change, and that reflects a 1% rate increase. And then the lodging tax, again reflected here, is a 1% rate increase. bringing in just over $1 million. Moving on, business and professional license, building permits and other permits, some slight increases here. I did want to note that for Councilor Oshrin, I know the rest of you probably know this, but we do have a revenue team that convenes monthly. It is comprised of the city manager, the deputy city managers, finance director, commissioner of revenue, treasurer, economic development director. We meet regularly to work on these revenue projections, to look at trends. I think we have an awesome team. We do some really good work. And so that work is what feeds into these projections and how we work through these numbers. So we will be meeting one more time. We'll have another month of collections under our belt to add to the trends and to revisit some of this. And so it is possible that before we adopt the budget, there may be some changes to these numbers that we'll be able to bring back to you. Intergovernmental revenue, again, this is where the revenue sharing agreement, a portion of it, so as you recall, with the revenue, well, in this chart, this is the full amount, but as we noted, or as we note in the budget, part of that also goes to the CIP and part of it we use to fund operations. So that makes up $2 million of that. In addition, the state numbers, again, the state budget is not final. And so particularly with last year, a lot of those numbers were budgeted as flat because we didn't know what was happening. And so we left them flat, and then we got increases, which will add to some of the surplus revenue budget that we'll be looking at in '24. For this year, we've made an educated guess of what it might be, but their budget process coincides with ours, and so it's a little bit hard to know those numbers until they actually finish their process. Charges for services, fairly straightforward there. Recreation income continues to be something that is, redefining itself after COVID as they're working through their programs and their master plan. But the decrease here is basically a decrease from the budgeted amount, but it's actually an increase from their actual collections. So last year there was a higher budget, or I should say the current year, we're in 3 years right now, but for the current year there was a higher budget, but there have been some circumstances in which they won't meet that, and so we have reduced that to reflect those operational changes.
Ms. Hamill, can you remind me of the revised asterisks, that
Yes.
last column? So
That-
how does that work again? We sort of get through the end of things and then we revise the budget and I guess adopt the revised budget? Or is this,
So we have not typically brought an actual action to council for you to formally revise the budget, but what we have done through the form of our quarterly financial reports is as the revenue team continues to meet during the year, as we look at how our actuals trending against the budget, we do know that there are instances in which we are going to do better or we might do less, and so that is what is being reflected here in this revised column.
okay.
So, for example, if we were to go
That's
back
sort of our
up,
best estimate where we're going to end up
correct.
in June 30th.
Correct. So if you take a look at real estate tax, for example, the budget actually includes the 99.4 million. What we know now, because we will have a half a year of the assessment that was just completed, we are now estimating 102 million.
Got it.
Good question. I forgot to talk about that column. Thank you. These last few sections transfers from other funds. Many years ago, there was some discussions with Rivanna, and there was a reserve created for the closing of the landfill. Turns out that we still have to Rivanna still has to maintain the landfill and do some monitoring, and so the city has a portion of that to pay. We have been buying down our share of that cost by buying down a reserve that we had on the books. That we do know that that reserve is going to be running out eventually, and so we are starting to wean that down, which is the result of the decrease here. That reserve at last check I think was about $1.7 million-ish, and so that's why there's a decrease here. Interest income, I think last year when we were working on the budget, interest rates were hovering around 1% or so, and what is it now? 3, 5. So that is the reason for the increased projection, and also for the large change that's represented here. And then for the designated revenues, again, 1% of our meals tax collections per our policy is designated to go to the debt service fund. And then for the contracts that the city provides to the schools for pupil transportation and maintenance, they pay us for that. And so those revenues just show here as designated because they really just offset an expense on the other side. So all of that equates to the $23 million that we are projecting for new revenue in '25, and represents a 10.1% change over '24. So I'm just going to pause here for just a second. As you know that we've talked about, the current proposed budget includes a 2% real estate tax increase, a 1% meals tax increase, and a 1% lodging tax increase. An ad has to be published as a notice of the public hearing that you'll be having on March 18th about the tax rates, and that has to publish by Monday. And so currently that ad will be advertised as a 3% increase. You can always go down, but you cannot exceed whatever it is that you advertise. So I'm just going to pause here for a second and give you all time. Is that where you want to be? We have tonight to decide if you wanted to advertise anything else any differently.
Can we maybe make that call at the end of the presentation?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm going to move on very similarly to walk you through the expenditure changes from '24 to '25. Again, I want to emphasize that this chart is all of the big items. It is not intended to be every single dollar change that is in the budget, but it does represent the big items. There is a plug figure on here, and I'll show you what it is. But this is the big picture of what has changed. And so, as you know, through conversation, we have increased our contribution to city schools by the $7 million. The rent and tax relief has been adjusted to reflect the additional monies that may be needed related to the tax increase. This year is a presidential election year, which means more staffing and more equipment for voter registration, so that is included here. Parks and Rec is looking for some contracted services for mulching and custodial services throughout the parks. And Public Works is using contracted custodial services as well, and they have all seen contractual increases. We've talked about the SAFER firefighters. There were 15 firefighters that were able to be hired using a SAFER grant that covered the full cost of those for 3 years, and then they have to become full freight of the city. For '24, we added a third of that cost into the budget. The '25 budget adds the other 2/3 of their salaries into the fire department budget, and weans us off of federal money that no longer exists for those positions. In addition, we've added a couple new positions in the general fund. The 2 firefighters and the 2 police officers, which Mr. Sanders presented to you as part of the new anchor team that will be going into place. Those were 4 new positions. In this current year, using vacancy savings, we have added capacity to the city attorney's office through an assistant city attorney position and also a legal assistant. And those 2 positions are now added to the base for '25, so that's why they're shown here.
And those will be new positions?
They were new this year. They're already accounted for is what we're doing, but now we're recognizing them in the budget.
Okay.
Not as if these 2 firefighters and 2 police officers, those positions don't exist today. We're adding those 4.
Can you please remind me what anchor is?
So you haven't heard the presentation on that yet. That's coming, but that's our co-responder model that we plan to help police in their response to issues in the community. Where we're going to try to be more human focused and not.
And that would be kind of a first step towards the Marcus Alert implementation?
Yes, it's moving in that direction, but because there are still a lack of details and funding in regards to that, then we're going to start our best effort on making the improvements that we think are
Ahead of
supportive.
what the state is
Yes.
requiring.
Yeah.
This is a small thing, but obviously we recently indicated that we want to move forward with ranked choice voting for the next municipal election. And they had requested, they felt they would need some kind of advertising and community engagement budget for that. I'm guessing that's not reflected in the voter registration item here?
Not yet. I think those actions came after the budget proposals and after we were well into the proposed budget. However, I think those are sort of one-time monies that are expenses that we could look to year-end surplus or other pots of money to address that.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to, however we get it, I want to make sure they're.
And there's still some lack of clarity as to how much is needed. So that will be part of the process for Taylor even to figure out what a proposal might be. So we didn't have a number. So we would have to figure that out.
Okay.
How many,
oh,
I'm sorry.
how many firefighters do we have?
I think sworn right now there are 109.
Is that in here somewhere?
It's in there, yes.
Well, it's not broken
not-
down by
Yeah,
sworn.
you won't see it exactly that way.
It's for the whole department, the FTEs for the whole department on there. I will get that for you. I
Well-
think it's 109, 12-ish.
Okay, and that's similar to our number of police officers as well, right?
Mhm.
And so these new positions are being added, not taking the people we already have
Correct.
and
Right.
reallocating them.
Both chiefs spoke to, that would be something that they would frown upon because it would then impact their operational models. And this is really meant to be an addition to. So they really requested that we add to their teams in order to make this possible.
Okay. There was one reclassification. There was a position that was in the golf course. And as the business model of the golf course has changed, that position has now been moved back to the general fund in the Parks and Recreation Department, and that is the position, this management analyst position that's noted here. Moving on to the compensation and benefits. The last year, we were just sort of, I don't know. I feel like we've been talking about class and comp forever, so my time is kind of warped on that. But it feels like we were just in the beginning stages of that. We weren't sure exactly, everything hadn't been worked out, but there was some extra money that was left unallocated out of some additional revenues that we brought to council at the end. And so $850,000 was set aside to work on some of that implementation. That is showing as a negative here because we're rolling it all up into the second line, which is the lump sum for the employee compensation adjustments. This is the pot of money that will be used to implement the class and comp portion of the budget. The collective bargaining contracts themselves, which are also listed here, have already been absorbed and are shown in the individual department budgets that are in the book. And so they are also listed here. We also implemented, because they were not part of collective bargaining, there was a pay scale implementation for the sheriff's department. The city's contribution to the healthcare plan increased by about a little over $1 million for '25. And then the retirement cost for the pension plan went up slightly, although the percentages stayed the same. The payroll is higher, so that went up slightly. And then the big item is that on top of all of this, we know that we will have some vacancies and attrition savings, and that is the $2 million that is represented here as the negative.
Which I would say is part of your efforts at right-sizing the organization.
Correct.
And you also had mentioned that the actuarial changes for the class and comp and collective bargaining, the one-time piece of that is coming out of surplus. Yeah.
That will be the recommendation that I'll be bringing to you.
So just a little, this
What
is
the net of that, you know? Sorry.
net of all of this.
Probably, yeah. Sorry.
No, I can't
Okay.
do it in my head. But, you know, I'll say that, if you break down, this is the breakdown between the departments, just to give you some idea. So prior to the contracts, the tentatively agreed contracts, the base salaries, let's just say fire was at 13 million, and after the contract is now the 14.6, and that's where the 1.5 million came from. So police and fire are general fund impacts. Pupil transportation is a general fund impact. Transit is in a fund all in of itself, although you will see a little bit farther down on the slides that there are additional local dollars that are coming from the general fund going to transit to help cover some of these additional costs. But all in, for the contracts themselves, were just a little over $3 million.
And I can't remember, does that number encompass those who aren't in the union, but their wages will have to go up because of wage compression?
No.
No, they're in they would be part of this class and comp adjustment in this 6.2
Okay,
million.
so that's okay.
Could you go back to that screen?
This one?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna just do this real quick.
Oh, you're adding it up.
Will we get this presentation?
We
I
have
emailed it to
Oh,
you.
you already did, okay.
Mhm.
I'm going to test my math. I tried to do it in my head.
And this chart that I'm showing you is also in the budget book at the end of the city manager's letter.
7.4. So, yeah, I would just offer a commentary here. I know that's not really what we're doing right now, but this is what I would say is an investment in a much better organization. Brian's view. Shouldn't say much better. I don't want to mean it that way.
Understand what you mean.
A baseline, sort of a step change investment in our organization.
Any more questions on the contracts?
One thing, just to clarify a point that might have been susceptible of misinterpretation, I think the question, the statement was made perhaps confusingly as to whether the amount of the pay increases for the fire, police, and transit covered non-union employees. That is, if there is a an employee who is not a member of the union, but is the same grade and character in every way, that person gets the same pay as the union employee.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Wait, say, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ask that again.
Let's say you got two drivers. One
Yes.
of them belongs to the union, the other does not.
That wouldn't happen,
It's
You
for
don't have a
management
choice.
roles.
because they're in the same classification,
Yeah.
so they would be in the union.
Well, but we don't have a mandatory union shop. We're not allowed to by state law.
I think the confusion is just for management who weren't covered at all in the
Right.
contract,
That's who gets the
their
union
wage going up
raise.
because now
Right.
maybe they're making the same as
Right.
someone starting.
And I just wanted to make clear
In a
that,
different
that
position.
nothing that we've done here violates state law
Correct.
in that we do not have a mandatory closed shop.
Right.
Yeah, but I think the distinction is that people who cannot be part of the contract because they are supervisor or they are automatically ineligible for some other reason
Right,
because of their specific position are not in this contract.
That's who we're really talking about.
yes.
So next week, we're gonna have a work session all dedicated to the, nonprofit agency and outside agencies. But this is a slide, that sort of highlights the, changes in those areas. One of the biggest notes is that, you know, council had a lot of discussion last year about if there was a way to increase the pot of money for the competitive process. And there were also some talks about certain agencies that were just considered to provide sort of fundamental services that we didn't feel like should be competitive. And so we put that into play this year. There were some agencies that were deemed to be fundamental that had previously been part of the competitive process. And in doing so, although the VCF pot basically stayed flat with the amount last year, by pulling those agencies out and funding their requests separately, that was a $992,000 increase for nonprofit agencies overall.
These are increases we're looking at?
Yes.
Correct.
So the list at the bottom are the ones that were pulled out.
Correct. And deemed to be fundamental.
Now, if I do the math on that real quickly, that's about $318,000. How is that, how then do we get to 992?
Because their requests, we funded their total request. So they would have, their total requests were 900 and some $1,000. There's a few other increases in that 992, but essentially the fundamental agencies, to keep it simple, their request totaled $992,000, which got added to the budget in addition to the pot for VCF.
Okay, so those last 6 lines are not intended to represent the line above it?
Correct. They are
Above
the
that.
increase from their
Inverse.
request last
Gotcha.
year.
Okay.
Do you have a question? Okay, I
Do
thought
I?
you were forming a question.
No,
All
not
right.
this time.
All right.
Interagency transfers, the transfer to debt service, again, this is mostly or largely a policy transfer. The transfer to CAT right now is in the budget at $1.3 million. The makeup of that increase includes the 3 FTEs that were added to help reopen the downtown transit station. There is a procurement buyer that was added, and a transit planner position that was added. You see the cost of those listed there. The collective bargaining contract impact was just over $573,000. And then there was roughly $270,000 of other operational increases that are happening and we will continue. This will continue to be a theme, especially for next year, because transit is starting to spend down their CARES and ARP money. We will continue to be having to roll over more local dollars to fill that gap. Transfer to Human Services is going up just a little over $500,000. $170,000 of that is for the administration of the anchor team, but part of that administration is also to a payment to a local partner for two mental health, I think it's two mental health associates. Clinicians, thank you. Also, there's Pathways administration costs, which are things like the phone system, the computer system, and those administrative kinds of costs. They are housed in the Human Services Department. There's some staff there as well, so that we had used ARP for that. That is being transferred from the city. And then there are also some other operational increases there that help make up that transfer. Transfer to social services is also increasing. Those are basically representative of just operational increases. And I think they have been working on their vacancies as well. And then, I can't see, transfer to CSA, that is actually a decrease. And I think that is, I'm not going to speak to that specifically, but I think that has to do with improvements that we are seeing in the foster care world, but I'd rather have somebody more professional speak to that specifically. Other changes, you see this other decreases and increases, that's the plug. That's kind of, the things in this section are largely looking at the city budget overall without itemizing to specific departments. Employee education overall, all departments, is going up about $169,000. Information technology, computer and infrastructure replacement, there is a decrease here. Part of this was honestly probably an oversight. We have existing funds in that pot, and for whatever reason, we missed it on this go around. So if there's an opportunity to replenish some of that, we should, but if not, it is shown here as a reduction. Vehicle repairs and maintenance and vehicle replacement funds, there's some slight changes there. Contractual increases for refuse. We've seen huge increases from our contractor for curbside pickup and also tipping fees. One of those we had to absorb mid-year out of the year-end surplus that you just passed for the current year, and this is an anticipated increase that is going to happen in '25. Overall, utilities are going.
Sorry to interrupt. Is there any kind of notion of trying to pass that on to customers?
Well, there's always the ability to consider that. We have not really approached that. What we found was that operationally, the market is changing. So some of the providers are getting out of the business. So that's made it a little bit easier for who is in the business to increase their prices. We learned about this late, I guess, spring last year, that it was going to be significant. We're also hoping to put it out for bid and see if we can do better, but it doesn't appear that the market is going to really prove that it's going to drop dramatically. So there's a chance that we can get the number down. So we're at this moment absorbing it, hoping that we can do better by finding another provider or at least negotiating with the current. And if not, then we may have to approach that later. But right now, that's not what we're proposing.
Okay, I would be interested in that at some point, more
Okay.
information. That's a pretty big hit.
Yeah, and I think it's like $65 a year for a bucket and then $250 for a sticker. So
Yeah,
there's, I think, room to wiggle on increases.
is that right?
There's
That's right, difference.
Yeah.
I forgot, he told me.
Yeah, there's
There's a lot of
32s
different
and
stuff going on.
the
Yeah.
whatevers, but yeah, and then there's two different sticker prices as well,
Yeah.
but
We're working through our normal process of just trying to see if we can make the adjustment that we need operationally before we would have to consider making price changes.
okay.
And then finally, cybersecurity software IT is working to enhance our cybersecurity procedures and protections. There is a slight increase there. And then the designated revenue portion, the designated expenditure, portion of that, the transfer to capital improvement program, as you know, we have a policy that, increases, that transfer, the policy is that we transfer 3% of our general fund budget to the capital projects fund as pay-go. So as the budget continues to increase, that number continues to increase. That's what is reflected here. The transfer to the city schools basically is for the building maintenance and the pupil transportation contract. So the building maintenance contract is just increasing because of contractual increases and things of that nature. Pupil transportation increase includes collective bargaining, 2 additional drivers, and it also converts 9 30-hour drivers to 40-hour drivers, or 40-hour positions. And then again, the transfer to debt service is another policy transfer that is just the equivalent of the meals, 1% of the meals tax, and so that's an additional $290,000 that will be going to the debt service fund. And so all of those things together get us to our increased expenses of the $23 million dollars, which matches the increase in spends of all of our new revenue. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Cullinan to give you an update on the ARP funds.
Thank you, Chrissy. Good evening, council members. I'm Chris Cullinan, the city's Director of Finance. Mr. Sanders asked me to provide you an update on these 2 financial items, which are not included in your budget, but obviously are significant. The first one is the update on the American Rescue Plan funds the city received, also known as ARP or ARPA in some circles. Just as a reminder, the city received 2 tranches of funds in June 2021 and June 2022, totaling $19.6 million. City Council allocated those funds into 2 main categories. One is called revenue replacement, which was $10 million, and the other one, for lack of a better term, are ARPA projects. The $10 million, for lack of a better term, is sort of the standard deduction the U.S. Treasury allowed local governments to take to put it into that bucket, and so that's the choice that was presented to council and that they took. There are some slightly different spending requirements with each of those. We can talk about those if you'd like. But all of the ARP funds have been appropriated by council. $18 million has been allocated for 64 individual projects over the last number of years. There's still about $1.6 million that are in unallocated accounts. Most of that is on the ARPA side. The ARPA project side is a little bit on the revenue replacement side.
Can I ask a quick?
I was going to ask you, can you distinguish for me between appropriated and allocated?
That was my exact question.
Appropriate means
Great
that
minds.
we've brought all the funds to you, and you've approved them being spent. But we also approved part of that appropriation was to a contingency account, and another one was to something we called unallocated. So there aren't specific things that are tied to those. So the money has been legally appropriated. However, it's not designated for a specific use like the other funds, which again were spread out over 64 different projects. So it's technically appropriated, but it's not being hasn't been identified for a specific use.
So to do something with the 1.6 million, you would not be ending a project that you're
Right.
planning to do. But if you were to touch anything else, you would actually be canceling a project or affecting a project.
Right. And then to date, approximately 65% or 12.7 million has been spent. 489,000 has been obligated to be spent, and obligated means it's sitting on a purchase order or a contract, some sort of a vehicle which obligates the city just to pay it. And there's about 6.5 million, which, for lack of a better term, I'm just calling the balance. That's the difference between those 2 categories and the 19.6. So those are, again, projects, money that are in projects. Those projects are either underway, have been completed, or are somewhere in between. And I'll touch on that here in a second if we go to the next
So,
slide.
real quick,
Oh, go ahead.
so the difference between the 1.6 million unallocated and the 6.5 balance to be spent, what's,
I believe that's
That?
what, that's like four.
no, I mean, like,
something?
how are they, I mean, other than the
How are they
number, how are they
different?
different?
Well, actually, if we jump to the next slide, I think it looks a little more granular difference here. So this is, again, just sort of slicing and dicing it slightly differently, just to give you some sense of these, of where these projects stand. And so you see the project status there. We have completed projects, projects that are away. Projects with questions is my shorthand for, I'm not sure what the status of those are. Some may have been started, some may have been completed. It's just some additional work that needs to be done. And then there's that unallocated amount there, the 1.6 million. So as you look across there, again, you can see how they've been allocated into these different buckets, totaling the 19.6, where the money has been spent based on those various projects, the obligated piece, and then where the balance comes from. So for completed projects, there's about a little under 600,000 left over that wasn't used for those. And it's a number of things. It's projects that were finished and there was some left over. It was some projects that were never started. It's a bit of an interesting travel back over the last few years and our experience with COVID. And two examples that I'll give you which contribute to that. The city at one time had a requirement that you be vaccinated in order to work for the city, or you had to go get tested. So we allocated $500,000 and employees went and got tested on a weekly basis. We spent roughly half of that over the course of about a year on employee testing. So when that requirement went away, there was money left over from that project. Another one is we set aside $20,000 for take-home COVID tests for employees. Again, though, that was at a time when COVID tests were not readily available as they are today. So that project never got started. So that's included in there as well.
Can I clarify?
Mm-hmm.
So the completed projects balance is kind of leftover.
Yes.
The-
Correct.
The unallocated balance is still available to spend on whatever we'd like.
Correct.
It's possible that some of the completed project balance is also available to spend on whatever we like.
Correct. And so that's the number you see in gray below there is those two numbers added together. That's the 2.2 million, which is available to be allocated to other uses.
So
That's
it's 1.6, but kind of really 1.2.
right. The 1.6 is really, that's never been allocated to any sort of specific project. But again, as we've gone along, we've finished a number of projects and there is money left over.
Okay. And I also would like to clarify one more thing.
Sure.
You just said about COVID tests being as readily available as they are now. I would just like to say to anyone in this room and listening that tomorrow, March 8th, is the last day you can order free COVID tests from the government. So do that today. That project and is ending tomorrow. So get that in now while you still can.
Any other questions about this table of project status, allocated, spent? Any?
Obviously, the December 31st deadline will sneak up on us faster than we think.
So that's the punchline. So there are actually two dates that we're keeping in mind. One is December 31st, 2024, when all ARP funds must be obligated, or they have to be returned to the U.S. Treasury. The other is December 31st, 2026, which we actually have to spend the money. We have to get the money out the door. And to Mr. Payne's point, tick, 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 December 31st is coming up quickly. And so when we say are obligated, the Treasury defines order placed for a property and service and entry into contract, subawards, similar transactions that require payment. So in sort of city finance speak, things like a purchase order or a contract, something like that is what we need to, is where those funds need to be. And also, as I've said and Mr. Sanders have said, we have no intention to send any money back to Washington. And so he has tasked me to ascertain the obligation status of the projects with a balance in order to formulate a recommendation to bring to your consideration before the 12/31/24 deadline. And so I'm going to be reaching out to those departments that have projects where they have balances, where there are questions, to find out where they are. One of the things that's also in the back of my mind, and I'm sure you've read this in some of the publications you've gotten from the National League of Cities, the U.S. Mayor's Council, some of those organizations, is there have been attempts by folks in Washington on both sides of the aisle to claw back some of these unspent funds. And so I think Mr. Sanders and I are of the same mind that we probably should spend these sooner rather than later. And so, again, he's tasked me with this job to ascertain these obligation statuses of these projects. But I think what we're going to come back to you with is a plan to not only obligate, but get those funds off the city's books and spent. But again, that work needs to be done, and we'll be bringing that to you in due time.
And is this money that has to be spent a certain way? So it can't, like, it has to be on a infrastructure project. It can't necessarily be the
So-
seed money for the scholarship.
So
fund.
that's where we go back just one slide. The difference between these up at the top, the revenue replacement projects and the ARPA projects. Revenue replacement, the city has the most flexibility with. If I recall correctly, the U.S. Treasury guidelines really said there are only 4 things you can't use it for, and there are things, frankly, we would never use them for. So it's to be used for what they call general government services, and the interpretation of that is simply, if it's something that you would normally do with your money, you can do it. So that allows us to have the most flexibility. The ARPA projects fall under the U.S. Treasury guidelines, which are very long and detailed in terms of what they can be used for. Now, there are a number of uses, but you do have to do a little bit more work to make sure you're within the boundaries of spending those funds. And so, as we look at these, in terms of the deadline, there's really, it's agnostic as to which pot it's in. It's just simply all ARPA funds received need to be obligated by 12/31/24 and spent by 12/31/26. Any other questions on ARP?
So what I'll add to this is just to simply kind of reinforce the statement that was made. So Chris and I have talked about how it's a priority for us to basically audit these projects that are underway or with questions to determine, one, that the project can be completed within the time period, that we don't feel as though there will be some issue with being able to meet this December 31st time line, leaving the money in jeopardy of being recaptured. And there also will probably be a layer of my willingness to reconsider some of the projects. So I'm going to do that as well. We'll take a look at what those projects are, and if there is a comfort level that I might find myself with, then I might cancel a project. So that then the funds could be used in any ways that are in support of priorities that we have not fully been able to address, and/or things that come out over the course of this process where we know that the budget is tight as it is, and without any additional changes, then the answer would be, we don't see how we fit it in. It'll have to wait until next year.
But I guess we've really just got a couple months to figure out, like, the completed projects had a balance. There's really only a couple months to figure out if that balance would remain for anything underway or to decide what
Right.
to cancel.
Right.
So,
that we can then determine what could we shift it to.
mhm.
Yep.
And any changes or recommendations would come back to
Correct.
council for a vote, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot to try to figure out, and,
He's ready. He's excited about it.
yeah.
I love ARP, what can I say?
Yeah, I mean, I had some thoughts of some of the things that were on the earlier slides as options, but I'll leave that to you all to sort out and bring back as recommendations.
I mean, in many ways, ARP is the amount of money that the federal government dispersed to local governments is something I've never seen, and probably we will never see again. If you think about $20 million, that's roughly 10% of our general fund. That is an incredible amount of money. And so we want to, at the time, dealing with the public health, economic, social, financial issues associated with COVID, but also looking for opportunities to, go big. This is game-changing kind of money. The money that was used to purchase the Avon Levy lot was from the revenue replacement bucket. And that was money that we could tap into right away and affect that transaction. So we might find some things like that in the next few months. We'll see. But again, we have no intention of returning these funds to DC. So we're going to get them spent, get them obligated. Next slide. The other item Mr. Sanders just asked me to touch on was the year-end surplus appropriation from fiscal year 2023. Hopefully this looks fairly familiar, as I think it was only about 6 weeks ago that you all passed this on second reading. It was about $21.7 million in total. Staff made a series of recommended one-time uses or funds to do things in the current fiscal year, which have now been built into next year's budget. Some of these probably look familiar from Ms. Hamill's previous presentation, some things that have been worked into the budget full-time now. And then, as you see at the bottom there, per our financial management policy, roughly 73% of that, or $15.8 million, contingency.
Obviously, last time this was before us, we had a robust discussion about the contingency allocation. Is there kind of a time frame by which we should expect a request may come back to us for allocating any portion of that money that went into the contingency?
Yeah, I would say that at this moment, we would say that it probably would be some point after the budget has been passed, because of course the intended use or the significant intended use that I have for it as the request that'll come for you is in relation to the one-time cost for the adjustments with collective bargaining and comp and class. Should the budget be adopted as is proposed right now, we would anticipate needing anywhere from 10 to 12 million of that 15 million for those one-time charges.
Okay.
And then the balance would be available for however we would want to carry that forward for the rest of the year, in considering other things as we have done with K-Tech, Dogwood, and other transactions through the year.
But the bottom line is a significant amount of it is de facto kind of spoken for.
Yes, I just wanted you to keep reminding yourself of that.
But then the rest remains and has to come to council each time before it's spent.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's the last slide in our presentation.
Budget dates.
Oh, budget dates.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, just a reminder, we get to spend every Thursday night together for the next month, working on budget stuff. The blue circles here are work sessions. We do have 2 public hearings. One is on the 18th that we talked about. That is the public hearing on the tax rates. The ads for that do have to be published no later than Monday, and with the Daily Progress's publishing schedule, that's actually going to publish on Saturday. Welcome, Mayor. For your edification, we talked about earlier that the current ad is set to go in and advertise for 3 cents on the tax rate. We can always come down, but you can't do anything more than you advertise. If there's any appetite to do anything different other than that 3, we have to know tonight for that ad. Pardon me?
Appetite for more.
Correct. And then also, there will be 3 separate public hearings. One will be on the real estate tax rate, one is on meals, and one will be on lodging. They will all be on the 18th. The 21st is our community budget forum, and that is also the night that we use that as the public hearing on the budget.
Can I ask a question about that?
Mhm.
Is that a meeting like this, or is it like a walking around talking to people style, like the one at
Like
Carver
this.
Rec, like this? Okay,
Where they would be able to come to the mic and speak.
got it. Okay, thanks.
And then April 4th is the work session. So just to kind of couple topics there to back that up. Next week we'll be talking about agencies, nonprofit and outside agencies. The 21st is the community budget forum. The 28th we'll be talking about the CIP. And then the work session on the 4th is typically wrap up all loose ends. What else do we want to talk about? Meeting. Some years we've not had to have that. We'll see how that goes. And then finally, we will meet for council to formally vote and adopt the budget on April 9th.
A kind of random question. What is the time frame by which we would receive the recommendations for how the CAF and HOPS are allocated?
That's on the next agenda. I believe it's on the next council agenda, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
For the work session.
Just on the agenda
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
just,
for this year's money.
So probably in
That'll be
a
April 1st.
week or so, we'll see.
What,
this is.
March 18th, I'm sorry. I'm already in next month.
Okay.
Yeah, March 18th. It's on the agenda.
And it's 4/9 that, is that a council meeting that night or an additional meeting that week?
We meet for, in theory, it's supposed to be like a 10-minute meeting right before you go to planning commission
Got
to vote the budget. So that's all of our formal presentation. We're happy to answer any questions, help with any discussion you all want to have, go back over any details you saw, anything you've found. This is the one work session that is really more of a general overview of the entire budget. It's not so focused, so we'll leave the rest of the time to you.
So I apologize for being late. I had just a lot of work things to do. But I had a robust discussion yesterday with the Downtown Business Association, and we had two staff there, Matt and I forgot the new gentleman's name.
I haven't met him.
Yeah. So, but, and they had just a couple of concerns, well, questions. One, you know, I think some of them wanted us to meet with them, and I said, one or two of us can do it, but we all couldn't do it just for them, and they had opportunity. I've listed all of the times where anyone could come and speak, but they had questions about the surplus and things like that as well. So, I mean, I was able to review the information. I'll be able to share it with them. It is public information.
Mhm.
Yep. And so they just had, they're like, you're going up on, I think some of the questions we had as well, it's like you're going up on the tax rate, but you had a big surplus. And, I was able to explain what we had done to that point, and it's not ideal, but it's hard to estimate, the economy, particularly with the way the real estate was doing last year. So I thought someone would be here tonight, but they may be in the future. So, but they have some other concerns that we'll talk with Sam about. So.
Okay.
I mean, is now the time to ask about like
Mhm.
why the street and sidewalk services went down by $111,000?
We would have to get you that answer, because of course, we don't have anyone here to tell you exactly what the cause of that would be.
Okay.
So, just generally speaking, some of the things that you're gonna see as you look through the departmental budgets. Number one, as Sam has spoken to you about, we've changed the way that we budget for vacant positions. And so, we used to budget vacant positions at the minimum, and.
It's a mid.
I'm sorry, at the
Mid.
mid, too many M's, at the mid, and we used to budget at the highest, at the, DB, or the pension rate, which is the most expensive, to be conservative. And as we have continued to return, large vacancy savings, because we've had large number of vacancies. One of the things that we did with this budget was that we took every vacant position, budgeted them at the minimum, and we're now using a blended rate, and so that's cheaper. So some of that accounts for some reductions that you see there. However, that is also offset because we don't know what council's gonna vote or how you're gonna vote in terms of COLAs. And so those are typically every year budgeted as a lump sum, like you saw on the slide previous. And then in the next year, that gets divvied up to the departments by the position. It catches up. And so there's a net effect there, but in some departments, you're gonna see negatives simply because of the way we're handling the vacancies. And that accounted for $2.5 million citywide, overall throughout the whole general fund. So that may be part of that. I also think that they moved some things around between divisions there, which is making up some of that. But we can look at that and get you the specifics.
Thanks.
Other questions? I know this is a general overview, but if there are other questions, clarifications?
So we're essentially at this point leaving ourselves roughly $1 million of that 1 penny on real estate tax. We've said we're advertising 3. At this point, we're really only committed to 2, but we have that option basically of $1 million to allocate.
We're not committed to any of them yet.
Well, that's true, but this budget is based off of 2.
On real estate.
Right, on real estate. And then the fact that we're allowing ourselves a 3-cent advertisement gives us sort of the max additional revenue that we have available of $1 million.
To move around or do anything else that's not already a part of the budget.
And is that, why that number? Is there something you have in mind for that million?
No,
just
it was not, it's
just
not
in
planned
case
in our
money?
mind. It was to allow you all some movement around if you were to make a change to the lodging tax or to the meals tax, you would have the ability to offset that with real estate tax, because the lodging tax, you already indicated no interest in going above the number that has been proposed. And then the meals tax, for the various concerns of who it hurts and impacts. If you were to make an adjustment, it would be a slightly limited adjustment that we would encourage you to consider in that regard, because if you cut it in half, that's a little over $1.5 million, and a real estate penny does not cover that. So anything that goes downward in what we have based the budget on requires changes. And that would mean we'd have to go back into the budget to find that.
And in my mind, and I would actually be in favor for the real estate tax rate, advertising it at 4 cents above even 3. And my thinking on it is obviously what we advertise is just the flexibility we have in our own discussions. Part of it may be, are there additional expenditures we want to entertain? But more than that, even in my mind, it's because I think we may have future discussion about what is the mix of revenue sources we want to land on. I'm still in a place where I think it's very clear from, as an economic fact, that the meals tax is our most regressive tax. I think it also has a larger marginal impact on some of those smaller businesses. And real estate is not a great tax by any means, but it's the most progressive tax we have the option to use before you even factor in the fact that we have a real estate tax relief program. So I think just from a pure policy standpoint, I think we would probably actually be better off to say raise real estate by 3 or 4, but not touch meals or whatever that mix lands. So anyway, that's my thinking on it.
Yeah, I didn't think that it was an appetite on council, to go really above 2, and so that's why, when I talked to the city manager, I put it at 3. I just, I know last year we did 10, didn't we? Or maybe
It was the first 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah, and we knew that we weren't going to go that high. We just kind of was like, and it was real uncomfortable there for a few weeks, and we didn't have any intentions, I don't believe, of going 10. And but anyway, so.
There was also a lot more uncertainty, I think, at that point, at least for me, because I was brand new to council.
Yeah.
And I feel more certainty about things now, so I have a hard time imagining that I will vote for more than 3 cents on real estate tax. 2 would be what I would prefer, mostly because, and I respect the points that Councilor Payne has made, but I feel like our community, we're making significant investments in our organization, and I think that's really the biggest takeaway, from this budget. But we're going to have to continue to do that, and if we're back around next year asking for more real estate tax increase, I just want to be thoughtful about that for this year.
So I guess no one else is interested in any further adjustment in terms of what is advertised?
No, I'm comfortable with 3. Yeah, maybe we should just kind of go down just to make sure. Natalie, what do you feel?
I maintain that I'm not thrilled, but also I understand it is an advertisement.
You're comfortable with 3 or more?
Not more.
Okay, got it, okay.
Lloyd?
I would say that I am, comfortable is the wrong word.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think I had suggested on an earlier occasion that 3 cents is something that could be doable on the real estate tax, but it would be seen as a trade-off against meals tax, not as a way to say, hey, we're gonna get, $3 million more in real estate tax and $3 million more in meals tax and $1 million more in lodging.
And that's my thinking as well.
So
But are you?
I'm okay with advertising 3.
I hope throughout this process, we'll just keep in mind that the economic reality is meals. Any adjustment will be our most regressive option, combined with the fact that if we were to go with this, we're gonna be about near the highest in the entire state for
Yeah.
both lodging and meals, whereas we're still in the middle of the pack for our real estate tax rate.
But the real estate tax rate itself doesn't matter in terms of comparison to other localities.
It
It's-
matters in terms of.
It matters as a multiplier on the assessment, so it doesn't matter by itself. You have to factor in the assessments as well.
But I think the flip side of that is that the impact on what people are paying in their tax bill is driven really by the assessments, not the rate.
Right, and we control the rate, not the assessments, so.
Correct. And the other component is, even with that factored in, it's our most progressive revenue option with the most robust real estate tax relief program in the state. So I still think it's a relevant fact that for lodging and meals, competitive industries, we're gonna be at or near the top in the state without much room to really adjust beyond that. Whereas with real estate, we're not. Just things for us to think about.
I agree that the meals tax and the lodging tax, because they're a percentage on what people spend, that is, you're able to compare that by just looking at the rate with other localities. But you're not able to look at just the rate with the real
I
estate.
understand all
Okay.
that, but I
All right,
still
I just-
think it's a relevant fact for us to keep in mind. I'm aware
Okay,
about
I just
the
want
reality of
anyone else
assessments
who's
existing.
watching, yeah, that it's a multiplier, it is not itself a number that can stand alone.
Yeah, and I realized when we went through this, when we were trying to determine what this different rates were going to be, that I know that we're probably at the apex of what we can do with the meals and lodgings, maybe the last year for the foreseeable future that we use those 2 levers.
Yeah, just because obviously, this I think we just have to think long-term. So I hear where everyone's coming from, and then, yeah.
On the long-term, bigger picture front, just briefly, the best way we can bring down assessments to a more manageable rate of increase or stability is to increase housing supply. So that is the long-term solution to making things more affordable. Can't forget that.
Let's hope.
I mean, that's the math.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so I'm gonna go one more round and see if we have any more comments from counselors, and then I'll open up to the public. So we'll have other opportunities, so can we just now open up public comment period? Is that?
Your meeting.
Yeah, so we're now open up to the public. If anyone would like to speak, you can go to the microphone, and you have 3 minutes. Okay, so,
Is there anyone
A lot
online?
of city employees here.
Anyone online?
oh, I'm sorry. Is anyone, are we doing online?
No.
Okay,
Oh.
yeah.
Before you adjourn, are you about to?
You know.
I'm
it-
not
it shocked me,
comfortable. I'm
yeah,
not comfortable,
just,
so I can't let us adjourn this early.
I know,
Just
it's-
serious. I'm being honest. I just can't.
So, yeah.
Well, I think one of the other implications we just have to be clear with ourselves and the community as well, is what we've agreed to advertise means it is impossible for us to meet the adopted schools budget. And that may be where we land, and that's fine, but I think we should just be honest with everyone in the community that that's where we're at.
With the present allocations from the state.
All other things.
And
being equal.
you correctly pointed out to us that there are about 6 different balls in the air with the General Assembly and budget that could well make life a lot easier in terms of how we let the schools get to where they need to get to. But in terms of what we can plan on, I mean, our real difficulty is the planning problem that we need to make our decision by the first or second week in April. Realistically, if we look at Richmond's performance last year, they went until September before they gave us an answer. We got to do the best we can with what we can.
And I agree with that. It's just, obviously, that's going to be something we are going to get the most feedback on, so I think we just have to be
Yeah.
honest that this is where we're locked in at.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a really good reminder. If we get some traction from the state on maybe funding for school buildings or whatever that would offset Walker, we're all just kind of speculating at this point, but is there some possibility to do a budget amendment where some of that money comes over into the operating side, gets reprogrammed mid-year to help them, or is that too much financial?
Doesn't even have an impact that quickly.
I'm not sure, but I think I don't know if anybody else knows, but I think that money from the state, is construction related, not operational, I think.
I guess my point is,
It is, but.
can we
Okay.
And the
offset?
but is that, and it depends on which formulation ends up getting approved. So there is not a definitive answer, but it appears that, for example, debt service on a construction project, like Buford, for example, if we can break out the amount of money in our debt service that is attributable to Buford and to other school construction projects, that amount of money can come out of this additional sales tax.
So it offset.
So one of the things we're gonna talk about, on the CIP work session is, we talked about this last year as well, before any of the new projects that we've added this year, is that we are looking at $1 million plus increase, last year. We were talking about $1 million plus increase in debt service, just to cover the things that are already in the 5-year plan. Now, you'll notice in the budget this year, that's only $300,000. That did not include Buford. So Buford is not in any of the numbers yet because that's in the plan in the out years.
Buford or Walker?
I'm sorry, Walker. So I used to say I'm Buford Walker. And so one of the things that is hard with the CIP this year is there is a lot of opportunity. So since we talked about that last year, we have gotten the $17 million grant money from the state, which is being applied to Beaufort. So that has brought that $90 million project down to, $17 million less than that. So there's that piece. That's less bonds that we have to issue. But we've added Walker at $30 million. We've added the library at $10 million. We've added West Haven at $15 million. And so if the sales tax piece or whatever is happening with this school legislation comes in, we've kind of already allocated that. So I think you're gonna need it in your CIP, either for debt service or to help, because there's also 52 or $55 million worth of school projects
56.
that are in the 5-year CIP plan. So we'll talk about all that. There's a lot of balls in the air that will be hard to nail down, and we'll do the best we can. But even with the things that we're planning, the debt service piece is going to pop back into the general fund, and it's going to be something that we're going to have to address. It's not really increasing this year because we got the grant and because some of these big things are in the out years, but we will need to start looking at that again.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding. So if the governor signed the sales tax legislation July 1st, we authorized a referendum, and that was on the November ballot this year, and it passed, that wouldn't help us with affordability in terms of Walker?
Oh, it absolutely would. So you could either use it to pay for Walker altogether, or you could use it to help offset your debt service and pay, yes, it will. But the point being is that we'd have to look at all of these other pieces and parts, and that's not gonna help you necessarily with the 25 operating budget.
Right.
Oh, understood. Sure.
And you said there would be about $52 million worth of school projects in the CIP. Was that including Walker?
It is.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that was other.
No,
Whoa.
yeah.
Okay.
That's the library and all those things you mentioned.
The 56,
Just
the
the
56 is just for schools.
So
So
we
that's
have
like roof
some
replacements.
replacements
Oh, I
in
see.
there,
Okay,
their
yeah.
priority improvement program, their ongoing regular stuff as well.
I guess just a few additional high-level thoughts.
Mhm.
Still, just because this is something we've gotten a request for and that the community will be paying attention, I would still like for us to be able to see that number for adding those additional CAT bus drivers. I don't know at which date, which work session that would be appropriate to see, but I think even if we can't or don't add it, we in the community should see what the bare minimum for implementing CAT's optimization plan would cost. It may be answered in the HOPS, in the CAF allocations we receive soon, but there's obviously a lot of both community attention and internal momentum, I think, around land trusts. And I'm curious to see what kind of comes from that. And doesn't need to be tonight, but could you, either tonight or at some point, I'd be interested to have us walk through what the expected use of the parking enterprise fund is gonna be for in detail, and the relevant kind of dates for that. And finally, I still think at about $1.5 million just from us going to the Visitors and Tourism Bureau. 2 years ago, that number was 700,000. I think there is some room that would have an overall more positive impact on our economy and budget than 1.5 going to that without, yeah.
Yeah,
So-
Councilor Payne has brought this up multiple times, and I'm now like, yeah.
So I guess everything that you've just said, starting with the drivers, I see being able to do. We can get you the numbers for reaching optimization within CAT. We'll know the answer to what, I guess you're interested in hearing what a grant award might be to Land Trust. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. I think there's going to be community members following what our investments on that are.
Okay. And then the use plan for the Parking Enterprise Fund, I think those are doable. As it relates to the CACVB, to me, that's a conversation among the five of you. There's nothing that we can give you in regards to that because that is a formulaic relationship that we have multi-jurisdictionally. That would be a change to that process. It would require engaging our partners in the other jurisdictions to make that change, if that was to then in some way change the amount of resources provided to that entity.
And I think there's like an 18-month window that has to take place for that to happen.
Now, if you need us to do
Wait,
that
I'm sorry,
research,
what was the 18-month
18
window
months to
for?
undo the
I
relationship.
think that's a term in the MOU.
Oh, so
To
if things
change the
change,
relationship
there's a.
or undo it or to end it or whatever is an 18-month window. And I'm sure that's to allow for them to make alternatives for
De-accession.
existence. Yeah.
Yeah, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not at all suggesting that, for anyone out there listening, that we pull out of that.
Sure.
But I would be interested in having a conversation there. So I think Councilor Payne has brought this up a number of times. I think it's a good point. Maybe the money is worth every nickel. I don't know, but
Is that a
It's
topic
a
that
lot.
you would like to have as a part of a work session then, so that you could hear from the CACVB and then go deeper? I'm concerned about, can I get you what you need within this budget conversation?
I don't think we can.
Yeah,
I don't know if we need a whole separate work session like this, maybe a small presentation and.
It'll be within a work session.
In the
They-
reports hour?
They would be one speaker within
yeah.
others.
What do
Yeah.
they do? Where does that money go?
I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know how else to start it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is the money because I represent the council on that committee. We actually had a call meeting today, and it's really clicking well. We finally got up to staff. So, I mean, from what I'm hearing, for what we do, the staff is really small. If anything, they're looking for additional resources because we're trying to compete with places like Asheville and other places, and they have 4 and 5 times the size of the staff that we have here. And the meeting today was to look at seeing how we can get some additional resources definitely have a discussion, about where it's going. I'm sure that Courtney
Yeah.
and her staff.
And
would love
I'm
to
just
do that.
pointing that out in regards to, everything else is something that is a possible lever to adjust the current budget. That one feels less like that. That's why I'm saying it the way that I am. And if that is a work session topic within the framework that we have 3 slots available within a work session, if a presentation can only take 30 minutes, we can work that out. I can arrange to have that come before you. What I'm saying is that I don't see that as a lever for this budget.
I think that might be useful in general, not necessarily in the budget discussion, but just because if we are talking about the revenue we get from tourists and
Mhm.
lodging and them coming to our restaurants and all of that.
And how to equate that
And
to
if
support.
if nationwide there's an increased investment in trains, we'll be getting more people from the Northeast Corridor. That could be good just to see like what is the strategy we have in drawing people here to spend their dollars here.
Okay.
I mean, Asheville is twice the size of Charlottesville. They have a minor league baseball team that's literally called the Tourists. So they lean heavily into that.
But that's when people are trying to decide where they want to go.
Right,
It's
and-
Charlottesville, Asheville.
And I actually lived there for a summer,
Yeah.
thinking I wanted to live there forever and
Yeah.
realized this is Charlottesville but farther away. So, it has similar feel and similar vibe and similar attractions, but we
Right.
are closer to everyone. So,
And
Okay.
yeah, I think it's worth trying to draw people here in that way. But it would be nice to kind of get a report on what is going
can
on
do
on
that.
that front.
yeah,
Okay.
I think that seems like a practical next step, and I would be curious if it could just be sent along to us what that MOU is.
Yeah,
Um,
we can do that.
That'd be interesting.
And I guess, it may not be a lever for this budget, but again, I think the question I'm interested in is, that's an agreement where, one of these agreements where an increase can get baked in from an agreement that was agreed on years ago in terms of a certain amount of increase in lodging tax revenue automatically going to them. And the question I have is, how much of our tourism is driven by the fact that there are wineries and Monticello and all these areas, and is that what's driving tourism, or is there a way to measure in terms of the Tourism Bureau putting out Facebook ads and Instagram ads? How much tourism is that really driving for a $1.5 million annual investment? Which I guess is a question for that presentation.
Yeah, so I can just chime in some, and definitely Courtney can come and give you more information. But an example, right now, it's a kind of low because it's based on a little bit lag on the lodging, and just like the schools, it's a little bit low. But there is a direct correlation in where we advertise. We do a lot of tourists and leisure things in Baltimore and Charlotte because it's a good day drive to come here and go back. When they had some extra money from the COVID, they were able to really do some robust advertising, particularly to the community of color, and that's how they were able to win a lot of those awards. And I found out at one of our recent meetings is one of the reasons that this region got the wine region of the world is because of our efforts to reach out to the community of color, specifically because of that. And they were able to do all those different things to reach out because they had some extra funds, and now they're gone. So I just don't. If anything, they're really struggling by the fingernails. I just like you all. I just don't see this. I'm not doing this because I'm a homer for them, because I'm on the committee, but I really don't think it's. I think this information is good, but I just don't want to create an extra meeting of this, doing already a lot of meetings, as like maybe we can, get some additional resources from it. I just don't think it's there, but.
We can work it in.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to pick on them, but I think I'm open to kind of questioning and investigating everything, even if the end result is we don't make a change. I think the community is fairly going to ask, if you had, this massive surplus, well over $10 million, you've already increased the tax rate the past several years on top of assessment increases. Why is that happening again? And if our expectation is that even after a revenue increase this year, in future years, it may happen again, my standpoint is I think we should do our due diligence and question everything. I think it was fair for us to dive into the jail as part of that. Again, regardless if it doesn't change our ultimate decision and opinion. It could be the same with the tourism board, nothing changes, but I'm just looking, any stone we can unturn, if there's something we haven't thought about in 10 years, I think we owe it to the community
Sure.
to think about.
Yeah. And you might be getting ready to say what I was
No,
going to
go
say.
ahead.
You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one point of clarification on that is, the current MOU does actually cap
That's what I was gonna
the lodging tax, at the 5%. So the calculation is only based on the first 5%. So increasing the lodging tax this time or any time, anything that we're collecting to over 5% is not part of that calculation.
Okay.
So that would that would be the request that Courtney would love to make to you, to be perfectly honest, to be able to get the increase.
And for this, because of that situation, and just where it fits in with everything else, I'm even inclined to be more interested in just what's going on presentation, less as a budget lever.
Sure.
Just like, what strategies are we employing, where are we?
I think we
draw
can
people
we
from?
can frame it. I'll work it out with her. I'm sure it'll be easy to have that conversation and have her ready to come before you as a part of the work session.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my dinner conversation is, can you name the top 10 places people come to from
Mhm.
Charlottesville? So it's
You'd want to know that, I would think. Anything else on your mind? I'm gonna say it's okay, we can adjourn now, but I just wanna make sure. I just was not okay with 7:12.
Well, did we have, or no public comment, right? 'Cause no online?
No online. So there being no other actions, we stand adjourned.
Thank you.